stagnation and decay of capitalism is an established fact. The conditions for a socialist revolution are here. But how can the masses draw the conclusions necessary to make the potential into a reality? What is required is a leadership capable of directing them along the revolutionary path. The Central Committee of the RCA met this past weekend, with one of the discussions being the transitional method. Pete Walsh led this discussion on what this method is, how communists have advanced transitional demands in the past, and how we can do this today.
When comrades go into activities and people are coming up to us because we have the hammer and sickle, because we have the bold name, and they ask, what do you do? What is this? What that person is asking for is not what means we're using to get to this. Building a fighting party, I think, begins with having something to fight for and knowing how to fight it and making that the center of everything. And I think that's it. If we can remind the comrades that we have very powerful ideas, that if we can connect them, if we can build a vehicle that can connect these ideas to the masses, to the working class, it will change the world. And that's ultimately what it is. What is the fighting party? It's a vehicle that can sink roots, that can transmit these ideas to the working class. Our role as individual members of that party, of that thing, is also to be an effective vehicle. We also need to be effective vehicles at transmitting these ideas, communicating them in a variety of different formats. That sometimes means you do prepared lead-offs. That sometimes means you do one-on-one discussions. But you have to be able to transmit these ideas, this message to people in all these different formats and styles. And I think that we have to be armed with a method, ultimately, of accomplishing this, not only on an individual level, but as a party, as a collective. How do we achieve this? And we've been reading up from the Comintern. We're studying the transitional program. Trotsky wrote this in 1939, 1940. These discussions that we're looking at. But it's not a new method. He leans on all the tradition, all the healthy traditions from the past. If you look at the Comintern, there's actually stuff in the first four Congresses that really details exactly the method that Trotsky is trying to transmit. In the third Congress, they had a thesis on strategy and tactics, and they say that communist parties can develop only through struggle. Even the smallest communist parties cannot limit themselves to mere propaganda and agitation. And all the proletariat's vital mass organizations, they must be the vanguard, the communists must be the vanguard, that by pressing for struggle for all the proletariat's vital necessities, they demonstrate how the struggle should be carried out, thus exposing the traitorous character of the non-communist parties. Only if the communists are able to take the lead and promote all the proletariat's practical struggles will they be able to win the broad masses of the proletariat in the struggle for its dictatorship. We've often referred back to the Comintern because they had a similar kind of task to go out boldly and build a party that was waving this banner, this symbol. And so this is the mission. And 86 years ago, amidst a very turbulent period, amidst the degeneration of the Soviet Union, the collapse of not the collapse quite yet, but the degeneration also of the Communist International, a defeat of several revolutions, a wave of revolutions that were defeated, which led to the isolation of the Russian Revolution and paved the way for Stalinist, the political counter-revolution of Stalinism, of fascist reaction throughout Europe. Trotsky wrote this piece, The Death Agony of Capitalism, and the Task to the Fourth International, which became known as the Transitional Program. And the whole point of it was to condense and bring this method that the Comintern also developed to a new generation of revolutionaries amidst all of this destruction, basically, of the forces of revolution. You had the Great Depression, the global crisis of capitalism. That became a major, severe political crisis around the world. Attacks on democratic rights as the bourgeoisie tobogganed downwards towards the Second World War. They were headed towards catastrophe. And I think that there are a lot of really interesting parallels. But I think that today there are some key differences. We're not really under the threat of a world war in the same way. But the relative decline of U.S. imperialism does mean that we have a period of tremendous instability on the world situation. There are 30 wars and civil wars. If you go by the official statistics, at least, I think if you say armed conflicts, then the number balloons quite a bit more. But just those 30 wars and civil wars that are going on right now affect a part of the Earth that hits 2 billion people. 2 billion people are basically in a wartime situation. It's a quarter of the Earth's population. The promised era of peace and prosperity after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the rise of U.S. imperialism as the major world superpower, that's been proven in reality to be false. It's a lie. The reality of capitalism today is a living nightmare, forcibly displacing 117 million people. That's more than 1 in every 70 people on the planet are forcibly displaced from their home as a result of this violence and of capitalism generally. It causes mass starvation. There are some 40 million people that are at emergency levels, according to the UN, of starvation. Every year, this is a particularly grim statistic, but every year, 5 million children under the age of 5 die, largely from completely preventable causes. Just hunger, lack of access to clean water, basic medicine, if they had vaccines, sanitation, these kinds of things. This number is equivalent to a jumbo jet, basically. If you filled up a jumbo jet and you crashed it every single hour of every single day for an entire year, that's the amount of devastation that's going on. And looming up above all of this, the existential threat that's facing our generation, facing humanity today, is not necessarily another world war, although that maybe is not ruled out in the long term. But the existential threat really is the climate catastrophe. And I think that if you look at all of this stuff, I mean, the question for us is to say, are humanity's problems, are any of these things really unsolvable? Is it insurmountable? Facing any of these difficulties. Should we really just be practical? Should we work within the system? Should we vote, for the lesser evil? I think that if you detail all of this out, you look at the numbers, you look at the science, you look at the resources that humanity's accumulated, we have more than enough technology and resources to tackle all of these problems. We could create a paradise on Earth. That's the image that we want to put forward. The utopia really is believing that capitalism, which is the root of all of these problems, could be resolved, or that you can create somehow a kinder, gentler, nicer form of capitalism, or that you could take the imperialists and try to pressure them into halting the wars or stopping some of the violence and everything. This is baked into the nature of the system, and the whole point of this method of what we're about to discuss today is to bring to light that truth, bring to light what is actually going on. And so, anyway, Trotsky, summing up this situation 86 years ago, was able to say that the whole crisis of humanity, this existential threat that they were facing, could be boiled down to the crisis of the leadership of the proletariat. And I think it's a condemnation in a lot of ways that we can repeat those words, or that 86 years later we can still say of our task that the strategic task of the next period, the pre-revolutionary period of agitation and propaganda and organization, consists in overcoming the contradiction between the maturity of the objective conditions, the revolutionary conditions, and the immaturity of the proletariat and its vanguard. It is necessary to help the masses in the process of the daily struggle to find a bridge between the present demand and the socialist program of revolution. And I think that's basically it. Look at the situation, the perspectives that we develop. And there is a maturity in the objective situation. There's a rising class consciousness and intensification of the class war. But the subjective factor is still quite weak. And that contradiction, I think, has never really been quite so acute as it is today.
The billionaire owners of the 76ers are trying to build a new basketball arena in the Chinatown neighborhood. And this is a working class neighborhood. It's a significant cultural center of the city. And the building of this arena would surely lead to gentrification of the neighborhood, would push out working class families, it would push out small businesses, and it would cause immense congestion and traffic throughout the entire city. And people, I think the overwhelming majority of Philadelphians correctly see this as just a way for the 76ers and the capitalists and the billionaires who own it to make a profit at the expense of ordinary people and at the expense of the entire city. Unfortunately, though, many Philadelphians are looking towards City Hall, which is controlled by the Democratic Party, and also the mayor, Sherrell Parker, to stop this. However, Sherrell Parker, the mayor, has come out in support of the arena, claiming that it will create thousands of jobs and revitalize part of the city. And as communists, we understand that jobs can be created and jobs need to be created, the society that we live in should be improved, but not at the expense of other workers or the expense of making parts of our city unlivable for most people. There's billions of dollars just sitting in the bank accounts of these owners, and we shouldn't have to strike a deal or beg them for jobs or for investment. We should have no trust in City Hall, and we should understand that the only way for us to actually have meaningful jobs and meaningful construction jobs would be to have a workers' government, a City Hall that is controlled by the working class for the working class. It's already the workers who create all value in society. It's the workers who would build this new arena. It's normal people who go to the 76ers basketball games and support them. And it's normal people, normal workers who would get displaced if such an arena was built. But if we want jobs and we want to revitalize our city, we can do that by, having the unions go to neighborhoods in Philadelphia with high unemployment and train people to repair our city that is full of potholes, that has problems with public transit and other issues and homelessness. We can train people to build affordable housing that will actually help working class people. But we can only do this if we have a government that's controlled by the working class, and if we expropriate these billionaires. We need to be able to put their assets under control of the working class. We can only do this with a workers' government. This is how we're going to stop gentrification in general. This is how we're going to create meaningful jobs for people, affordable housing for people. And this is a problem that isn't specific to Philadelphia, but to people all around the country.
The Fourth International, if you read these discussions and see that they're leading up to the founding Congress of the Fourth International, and Trotsky dies shortly after this, and so this is an inheritance that he's trying to pass along to this new generation. It was largely squandered, by these people who failed, I think, to really grasp the method and build the kind of force that was needed. I think that we have the benefit of starting in a very different kind of situation, at least internally. The beginning of our work wasn't trying to kind of pull disparate forces of people from the wreckage of the Comintern and all these things. That's what Trotsky was dealing with. He had a very difficult hand to play. We have the benefit of beginning with a very ideologically cohesive organization of cadre, people who were attracted to the ideas of communism and have come in and have broad access to the last century of history, to revolutionary theory, to all this stuff that we can train people up in. Trotsky was discussing with Teamsters and union organizers, as we said in the last couple discussions, people who know how to organize, how to agitate, how to seize opportunities and lead a struggle. And they had done so in 1934, just a few years before they were sitting with Trotsky in Mexico having these discussions. What does it mean to sink roots into the working class? What is the role of the revolutionary program in this? How do we wield that program and become, as the masthead of our paper says, the voice of the communist generation? I think that's some of these key questions. We can find answers by studying this period of history and by studying this theory and these discussions. In Lenin's "What is to be done," maybe starting with that last question. In Lenin's "What is to be done," he outlines the role of the press, but I think he's also talking a lot about the party and the individual members of the party. And he starts talking about how the individual social democrats should be a tribune of the people. And he says one who is able to react to every manifestation of tyranny and oppression, no matter where it appears, no matter what stratum or class it affects, who is able to generalize all the manifestations and produce a single picture of police violence and capitalist exploitation, one who is able to take advantage of every event, however small, in order to set before all his socialist convictions and his democratic demands, in order to clarify for all and everyone the world historic significance of the struggle for the emancipation of the proletariat. And I think that if you really absorb the significance of this, what is it that we're trying to do? We need to become that kind of person. We need to become that kind of revolutionary. This is I'm talking about trying to become a tribune of the people, to bring out this class truth at a time when workers have been drowning in all kinds of election propaganda. Everywhere you go, you're inundated with lies and pressure from the bourgeois media. We talked about Bidenomics and all the pressure to say that Biden is bringing back jobs, he's taming inflation, the times are good, he's the most pro-union president ever. We're getting blasted with that one, every day now. And then we find out, of course, over the last couple weeks, that they have this accounting error. They've added 800,000 fewer jobs over the last 12 months than they initially reported. The rate of inflation is declining, but as comrades explained, over the course of his presidency, it adds up to something like 22%. Inflation. It's a huge boost. Anyway, comrades got that. This is happening at a time when 78% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. When 2/3 of people couldn't afford a $1,000 emergency, it would completely drain their savings. They would go into bankruptcy. Bargain retailers. I saw this presentation by the CEO of Dollar General, who said that in good times, their core customer base normally works a 30 or 40-hour work week plus another 15 or 25-hour job on top. But now, according to him and according to the sales figures for this store, the good times are gone. If they're in a desperate situation, I think that if you really absorb all of that, look at this situation. When people feel discordant, when they feel that everything that they're being told by the media, by the politicians, by all the institutions is completely discordant with the reality of their life, I think it's no wonder that all the confidence begins to erode in all the institutions. The political center collapses because it's not offering any real answers. People start to look for radical solutions that actually express their reality, and you see that people have a sentiment. Yes, we need to be precise, but when Trump says this nation is in decline, I think that strikes a chord with a certain layer of people who feel like they can't even, if they're working 60, 65 hours a week and they can't even afford to shop at Dollar General anymore. I think that if you look at this, how many times do you, the way that I see it, I think, is if you give the manifesto to somebody, how many times have you had a discussion with somebody, you give them the manifesto and they come back and they're wild-eyed, they can't contain their excitement, and almost without fail, you get this sentiment that they read this document and they feel themselves reflected in the pages of this 100-plus-year-old document by a couple German guys expressing this thing. They feel that the things that they felt that were incoherent, that they couldn't articulate, just like an anger, a class hatred, and a rage, suddenly it's expressed on the page in front of them in clear theoretical language, and it gives them a lever to change society. It gives them a lever to do something about it. That's our aim, I think, to be that kind of thing for people on an individual scale when we're doing the recruitment with ones and twos, but also on a mass scale. The party should be having that kind of effect through its literature and the way that it communicates. We need to build up the communist so that it strikes like a bolt into these debates, into a workplace, and it exposes the truth. Basically, it exposes what is actually happening, so that people have this sudden feeling of illumination, this thing that they can't ignore, that's being expressed in the pages of our press. That's what we're aiming to develop, I think, when we had this push to have communist agitators. We wanted people that could express this kind of thing, that could be that bolt of thunder and shake people out of that routine. But I think that the secret to bottling that lightning is not so much to focus on the form of that lightning. It's to grasp onto the powerful ideas. It's to grasp onto the theory, and to be able to express that truth in clear language with facts and figures. And we circulated this piece. I was rereading some of the stuff that we circulated back at the time. There was this piece by Eugene Debs called "The Secret of Efficient Expression," and he explains basically in clear language how is he able to become such a great orator? How is he able to connect with people? And basically, he says he couldn't have forced it. It almost comes out of him. He says at one point in this little document, "I abhorred slavery in every form. I yearned to see all men and all women free." And he latches onto this truth. He talks about child labor and all of these things. He latches onto this truth, and he just dives into it with a passion. He can't let it go, and it grows in him more and more until he can't contain it. And he says it chooses its own words and it forms its own sentences. He says that's the secret of all great orators. Basically, the sacred fire burned within them, and when they were aroused, it flashed from their eyes and rolled from their inspired lips in torrents of eloquence. I think that's what we're aiming to be is to fill ourselves, I think, with the perspective so much that it pours out of you in that way that you can't contain this. And I think, thinking about Debs a lot, I'm rereading the biography with Jesse. In many ways, I think that Debs reflects all the, we often focus on all the negatives of Debs, that he spurned, theory and these kinds of things. But I think he also, expresses a lot of the positive traits of the American working class as well. Immensely dedicated and self-sacrificing. He transformed the Union when he got into the position in the Union. He transformed it into a well-oiled machine. And when people needed advice, he gave them advice. He gave them money out of his own pocket to help them get them organized. But all of that being said, he wasn't a consciously trained Marxist, and he did not arrive at those ideas through intuition. He did not arrive at those through study. He arrived at it through intuition and trial and error, and it was a difficult process. And as a result, he didn't ever really reach a full scientific understanding like you saw with Lenin and Trotsky. And so Trotsky, I think, in a lot of ways, when you read these discussions, is dealing with the same kind of pragmatic attitude in the SWP that Debs had, basically. He was trying to transmit a scientific method, a dialectical method, to the Americans when he did this. This is basically what he means. If you think about what Debs is trying to express, that he grasps onto this truth and he lets it pour out of him, Trotsky basically says the same thing to the SWP, that the program is the articulation of the necessity that we learned to understand. And since the necessity is the same for all members of the class, we can reach a common understanding of the tasks, and an understanding, and this understanding is the necessity. The understanding of this necessity is the program. And so the program basically is that thing. It latches onto what is actually happening and exposes the reality of capitalist society, and shows a way forward for the working class. Several times throughout the discussions, I think you can see the SWP express this kind of mechanical black and white thinking as they try to kind of grapple with this dialectical logic. At one point, comrades can come in with examples if they'd like, but at one point, Trotsky kind of has to sum all of this up. He says, some of the comrades have the impression that some of my demands or propositions, are very opportunistic. Sometimes they say they're too revolutionary. And he says this combination is very compromising. And so he'll briefly explain this apparent contradiction. He basically goes on to give a perspectives discussion, explain the situation yet again, this situation, and then to explain this program is ultimately a scientific program. We're not in the business of constantly psychologizing the masses, watering down our ideas, trying to figure out what's going to appeal to them. But that the transitional program is a dialectical whole. It's not just a smattering of good ideas and demands that are kind of randomly slapped together. It's a dialectical whole that resolves a number of contradictions, which I'm going to maybe give some examples of. He talks about the minimum and the maximum program, of course. He talks about, like I said, the maturity of the objective situation and the immaturity of the subjective factor. We also often talk about this idea of needing to be able to link the finished program of socialist revolution to the necessarily incomplete slogans and ideas that are being thrown up by the movement. And ultimately, I think if you can really grasp this method, it is the dialectical synthesis of implacable theoretical clarity and tactical flexibility. And so anyway, just on the point of the minimum and the maximum program, I think we're all actually pretty familiar with the pressure to kind of like water our ideas down or do something now, to be practical, leave big pictures to the future, leave questions like the revolution or even a class-independent party. That's too far for some people, so leave that to a distant point in the future. But this kind of black and white either-or thinking, I think, is plagued the American movement from the very beginning. And I think it's actually kind of useful to go back and see, just as a foil, what does it look like to have this other side of the debate. There are all kinds of debates from the very beginning of the socialist movement about whether or not, when they set up a program, should they just keep to the immediate demands that are palatable to people, or should they include the whole litter of bourgeois reforms? And the debate basically centered around, should we have any reforms? If we have any reforms that could be accomplished even partially under capitalism, does that just make it easier for the capitalists to exploit? Does it just make it safer for the system? And so a couple other quick examples. When the communist parties were formed and immediately shattered into three smaller pieces, They had a leaflet. There's an example of a leaflet in one history book of communists basically agitating on the precursor to the New York City subway, the New York City Transit, the Brooklyn rail line. And so they're communists distributing this leaflet 100 years ago in the city. They say, "Get ready for armed revolution to overthrow the capitalist government and create a workers' government as your brothers did in Russia. Stop merely asking for a little more in wages. Overthrow the dictatorship of the capitalist, the present government of the United States, and through Soviets and a proletarian dictatorship, take possession of the BRT and every mill, mine, factory, railroad, field, and farm in the United States." And since there were multiple communist parties, there were other leaflets, competing leaflets, this time in all caps, saying, "You must direct your strikes against the government and must overthrow the capitalist government. When the final struggle to overthrow the government comes, you must have guns in your hand, even as the West Virginia miners have now, and be prepared for an armed insurrection to wipe out the government of the capitalists and establish your government, the government of the workers' councils." Anyway, these are as Bryce said when I was showing them to him, masterful examples of the bridge, of a dialectical bridge to the socialist program. No, it's almost comically bad, but I think that you can see it's not so much that there are any real concrete examples now necessarily of something this bad, but you can also see that having a demand that has really nothing concrete. This is another point that Trotsky stresses, is the need for concrete demands. Having something that isn't concrete at all, that doesn't allow the working class something to latch onto, something to mobilize around. They aren't able to organize. They go into these things wherever they have success. They find a communist, somebody who agrees with that perspective. They don't organize a communist vanguard in the transit workers. They don't organize a communist vanguard in the movement of the working class. They tear off anybody that's far-sighted, anybody who has a revolutionary perspective, and they build a sect basically. And so that was ultimately the effect. We can't fall into either extreme. Obviously, we need to find points, I think, that address the real needs of the working class and dialectically draw connecting links to the revolutionary conquest of power. As Trotsky explains it, when he's trying to kind of break this mechanical thinking, what he says is that it's not so much that we can't adapt ourselves basically to the current level of consciousness. The task is to adapt the current consciousness to the objective situation, to do what we can to try to raise class consciousness. Because that's kind of the point, is we can't change reality, but we can use the program to help the workers, or at least a portion of the workers, overcome their inherited ideas, their methods, their prejudices, and bring them into harmony with the actual tasks that are being posed by history. And so on this point of concreteness, I think it's actually really important. Trotsky says, look, this is a scientific program. You can't adapt reality to consciousness. Basically, you have to do it the other way around. You have to adapt consciousness to the reality, which means that you have to be concrete. You have to be able to make it. In order to make a bridge, basically, you need to be capable of exposing that reality. You have to show that the revolutionary perspective is the only realistic one. That the capitalist perspective, that capitalism is basically incapable of solving the problem because it created the problem. And so in that point, he also starts talking about this. Basically, I guess in philosophical terms, I thought this was kind of interesting. The way he was framing it is you have to be able to show how reason has become unreason, how reality has kind of flipped on its head, and show that to people, whether it's on an individual level that you're discussing that, or whether it's through the whole mechanism. Either way, we're using the program to expose that reality. But that does not necessarily mean, and Trotsky also points on this point, that we don't include what he called the most simple demands, things that can be achieved under capitalism. And I think that this is also a really interesting point, because there are people who today argue, maybe not in the comical way that the communist parties were doing 100 years ago, but there are people who argue basically that we shouldn't raise any kind of slogan that doesn't have socialist potential or revolutionary potential. And so we had this debate with the Spanish movement the socialist movement in the Spanish state, and we explained that the virtue of raising slogans in favor of reforms that are felt to be more immediate is in mobilizing the more inert and backwards layers of the class, those who do not in general respond to more general slogans. Whereas the Comintern explained it, the demands should express the needs that are experienced by the broad proletarian masses, such that they are convinced that they cannot survive unless these demands are achieved. So if there's a desperate situation, that's what we're trying to latch onto, to show that this is, in order to achieve these things, in order to achieve, achieve a decent standard of living, it cannot be accomplished under capitalism. Capitalism is responsible for the onslaught against the standard of living and all of these things, right? And so unlike the reformists, that is kind of the point. We see these as a means to an end and not as an end in themselves. It's through the struggle for those reforms, even if they're partial, even if they're not complete, that the working class becomes conscious of its strength and its role in society and its ability to transform things. And so I think that this is also a really important point. Comrades, we've seen a lot of comrades experimenting with making leaflets and drafting leaflets, making slogans, trying to engage with the movement in their local area. And I think that sometimes comrades can come under pressure, a lot of pressure from the left generally, to adopt some of those confused slogans, things like quotas or things on gentrification, on imperialism. There's a lot of pressure to adopt things like, an enemy of my enemy is my friend approach, or to be in favor of democracy, U.S. capitalism as a force for democracy generally. And I think that ultimately, what we have to do is if you think of like an Occam's razor type of thing, I think that Trotsky, in their Morals and Ours, developed a sort of Trotsky's razor, where we can ask when we're confronted with a slogan, does this slogan, does this demand advance class consciousness, confidence, and unity, or does it not? And I think that's ultimately got to be our standard point for these kinds of things. On the question of how we overcome the weakness of the subjective factor, or generally how do we wield the program to overcome this? Trotsky basically makes an identity between the program and the party. He says that the significance of the program is the significance of the party. If the party is the vanguard of the class, it's formed by a selection of the most conscious, the most advanced, most devoted elements, and the party can play an important historical role, not in direct relation to its numerical strength. The party guided the Soviets in 1917 through the whole country thanks to correct policy and to cohesion. In what does this cohesion consist? This cohesion, again, is a common understanding of the events, of the tasks, and this common understanding is the program of the party. We have a common understanding. We have a collective tool. We don't need to improvise individual weapons like a Debs did, intuiting through his actual lived experience what to say. We have this program. We have a collective perspective. What we need to really do is study it and master it. It's a general tool. And so I think that if you're going into a strike or these kinds of things into a particular campaign, we might have to add and augment this with some specific points around a particular campaign. But ultimately, those specific demands, those specific things, should link back up to our general perspective or our general program. And so I printed out actually a copy of the current program, and you have broad margins that you can kind of fill out with facts and figures and these kinds of things. And I think that that's really what we need to be able to do. Just like dialectics, at one point Trotsky makes this point that dialectics does not replace having a logical framework, doesn't replace the need to conduct science and gather data. You need to do those things in order to fill that framework and use the dialectical method. And so I think that we have a general tool, we have a framework in the program for understanding the world and for communicating the truth, basically, of the situation. We still need to read the news. We still need to study facts and figures, and we still need to be able to elaborate those points in the things that we're engaged in. Any I think this should be our brand. When we take interviews, we should be committed to the brand. Just like any company representative, basically shouldn't take an interview and then go off brand and say things that are kind of off script. We should we should do that when we're in interviews. Not only that, I think when we talk with individuals, we should of course engage with them in what they're interested in and get them to and ask questions and discuss what they're curious about. But ultimately, even at a paper sale, even in one-on-one discussions, we're not blank slates that are there to have pleasant political discussions with people. We're there every interaction, whether it's with a single person, a crowd of people, a union, it doesn't matter what it is. Every interaction that we have has a purpose, and the purpose is to raise these ideas that represent our common understanding of the situation as a party, and to inspire the confidence ultimately of the communist generation, the people who are moving in this direction. And Trotsky reiterates this point as well. I think that this is an important thing. He says, what is important is to know the slogans very well and to maneuver them skillfully so that in every part of the country, everyone uses the same slogans at the same time. 3,000 can make an impression of 15,000 or 50,000. What is necessary is to repeat with insistence, to repeat every day and everywhere. That is the task of the draft program, to issue a homogeneous impression. That's basically it. The point of a brand, the whole aim of having a brand is to develop recognition by issuing a homogeneous impression, right? I think that sometimes, all too often, we read the paper, we read some statistic, we get a news update, and we say that in the branch meeting or the discussion, and then we don't really use that to maximum effect. I think that this like 78% of people live paycheck to paycheck. We should be harping on that, harping on all these other points about war and the spending, concrete facts. It doesn't matter if we have heard this statistic or slogan before, because it has to be repeated and repeated and repeated again. Why? Because we're the only ones that are repeating these things. We're the only ones that are representing this brand, and I think that that's what we need to be able to do. That doesn't mean, the other part of that he insists on. Is that we have to be able to use these slogans skillfully, and I think that's another key point, right? It doesn't mean that we just, I know I just said that we harp on these things, but you have to be able to do it artfully and connect with people. That's the key thing. The whole goal is to connect with the masses. And Trotsky, as he explains, having 10,000 people with good connections is better than having 40,000 people or whatever other number who are separated from the masses in rebellion. And so we're still quite a small force, and we have to recognize, I think, the fact of this situation. The working class does have an existing leadership, at least in the unions, and the movement will throw up demands and slogans that are confused or incomplete, and we will have to deal with those kinds of things. The road to the masses, the road to convincing people of this truth and percolating this program into the movement isn't necessarily just a complete straight line of denunciations and negative critiques and these kinds of things. We can only win authority for these ideas in practice, which means that it means skillful use of the program, the way that we deploy slogans and demands to connect the masses. And so Trotsky takes at this point also just in the United Front, in the fourth, the debates in the United Front. There are a lot of people who are saying, why can't we just appeal? Why can't we appeal to people to break with the old reformist parties and join the Communist Party? We're the only real revolutionary party. And he says, look, if we were able to simply unite the working masses around our own banner or around our immediate practical slogans and skip over all of those organizations, whether party or trade union, that would of course be the best thing in the world. But the question of the United Front at the time arises from this, that certain very important sections of the working class belong to those reformist organizations or they support them, and their present experience is still insufficient to break them with the reformist organizations and join us. And maybe precisely after engaging in those mass activities, which are on the order of the day, that a major change will take place in this connection, and that is just what we're striving for. And so I think that's kind of the key thing is convincing the ones and twos is one thing. It's not the same as trying to win over masses of people or whole groups of people who have to learn through experience, and we have to show in practice, deploying these slogans in the movement, that we're the real champions of these movements. That's the way that we have to frame all of these things. And so we have to engage with the movement as it is and not how it should be, and raise positive demands. That's the key idea, I think, that spell out our ideas and how we can advance the struggle. Trotsky, I think, makes an interesting point that basically this places the leaders in a bind. When there's a movement, upswelling, they kind of on the one hand exploit this movement to try to gain authority for themselves, while at the same time having to act as a brake to try to keep it from going beyond certain bounds. And so we apply a positive pressure here, raising our ideas for how we can escalate things, how we can advance the class struggle, and the leadership is either swept along in the current of things, or they're exposed as ultimately being a brake and holding things back. Either way, the task and the way that we raise these things is to try to make connections and win authority. And so Trotsky gives several examples of sometimes of having leadership or confused slogans and how he would address them. He talks about the LNPL, the Labor's Nonpartisan League, And he says that, look, we understand that this is a confused, a confused element that it's often is being set up to act as a pressure group to channel support back into the Democratic Party. But that instead of beginning there, he would go into a meeting and basically say this is a step forward to bring all the unions together on a common political plan, but that he would propose certain measures to prevent that from falling into the hands of our enemies. Make sure that we only have representatives of workers and farmers, that the representatives be held accountable to the program, and then we can map out these points. He makes some similar points on the Ludlow referendum, the Ludlow amendment, and the referendum on war, which I can't get into. But I think that we have some concrete examples also in our recent history, just really quickly, on the encampments movement. I think that we learned a lot of really important lessons. And we had, I think, a certain scientific position, which we had arrived at over a long time on the BDS movement. And we understood that boycott, divest, and sanctions are all really just kind of pressure tactics to apply pressure onto the bourgeois. And that these are raised by a layer of petty bourgeois activists who, their starting point is to spurn revolution and to try to keep things within certain bounds. But now, the encampments movement sprung up, and it was a completely different kind of mood. It was a whole layer of genuine young people looking to take basically collective political action towards a concrete aim. And so, while we understood, I think, the limitations of divestment, even if this is achieved, we also saw, look, this is a way for the students to try to exert some control over the university, to take some steps forward in this thing, and so we can take the positive kernel in that and push that forward.
Me and a couple of comrades went to the City College of New York encampment back in late April. What we happened upon was an assembly put on by the PSC, by the Union of Staff and Faculty at CUNY, that was including students in proposals and decision making. So students were encouraged to put forward proposals to the assembly, which then would be voted on. And we had to think, well, since students are being invited to come up here and make proposals, what is something that our comrades who are students here can say that will connect with the mood of the assembly, that will connect with the students and with the teachers, and that will raise their level of consciousness and raise the struggle to the next level. And so a comrade went up and she said, well, look, this assembly should elect more delegations to systematically and methodically spread the encampment and bring more teachers and students out here to support this. Unfortunately, the encampment was literally crushed the next day by a huge raid of the police. But had there been more of these types of bodies all around the United States, and had these bodies tried to expand and elect delegates to expand and reach out to workers and reach out to students and try to grow the encampment, not just like quantitatively but also like qualitatively, bringing out the unions and such, that would have been a much more effective way to struggle.
Our primary aim in intervening wasn't to try to take control of the movement, but to intervene with our program, to intervene consistently and insistently with that brand, basically, to try to help bring mass political consciousness into harmony with the objective situation. And so I think that we can say, for instance, that spontaneous mass movements have a tremendous power, but in order to sustain that power, they need to have structures. They need to be given effective, to have the most effective fighting methods, basically. They need to have structure. They need to have democratic assemblies. We need to link those assemblies up across the campuses and across the cities, to unite this into a national movement. They have to make an appeal to the working class, which is the only force that has the power to shut down the war machine and change the situation. We can also make the point that both capitalist parties agree cuts to education and cuts to social services, while they send fresh waves, billions and billions of dollars, in support to the imperialists abroad. And so we need a mass political party based on the working class that has this program. We can spell out our program on this point. And that's, I think, the point, is our aim is not to be one of the 57 varieties of sectarians, but to be the communists. And I think that means picking up these demands, learning to back them up with facts and figures, and repeat them boldly until we become a recognized force. And then there's one final question, which I'm going to just end on here. We often ask, I think, looking at this new situation and the party that we're building and the fighting party, that we're trying to produce, and the question is, when will we be tested? You know, I mean, we're entering a very turbulent period of history. Class struggle is intensifying. We said earlier that polarization to the left also means polarization to the right. That there will be, the crisis in the system means that there's a crisis in bourgeois democracy, increased repression, all of these kinds of things. And Trotsky, I think, made an interesting point in one of the discussions. He just said only war produces war heroes. And looking at the situation that we're in versus the situation that the Fourth International was in, we are still at the beginning of this process. The Fourth International was forged in a period where the Comintern had just collapsed. The forces of genuine Marxism were not a tiny minority back then 100 years ago. They had reached a mighty peak. They had mass parties in several different countries around the world, and it was only after waves of defeat of those revolutions that they were decimated, and that flame was almost extinguished. And what Trotsky is trying to do in these discussions and with this transitional program is to take those smoldering embers and rearm a new generation of revolutionaries. And he placed a tremendous weight onto their shoulders. I think that if you look at this and think that all this was addressed to a layer of people, the whole crisis of human culture comes down to the historic crisis of the leadership of the proletariat. That was placed on the shoulders of these people that he's talking to. And they, of course, we know because we're 86 years later and we're repeating a lot of this stuff, we know that they did not succeed. Marxism remained for a long time, for that whole period, an isolated minority. But I think that we are presented with a very unique, important, immense, honor and duty to see this communist generation. We have these millions of people who are moving in this direction. We have the possibility, the duty to break that historic isolation of the forces of Marxism, to bear the weight that Trotsky was trying to place onto their shoulders. And reading these discussions, you can't help but feel that often he's putting forward this stuff and that it's falling on deaf ears, that's not the audience that he was trying to reach. I think that, comrades, our task, if we frame it this way, is to retie the knot of history, to become the party that Trotsky was talking to when he comes in and talks on this point, but speaks to the founding Congress and says that there was never a greater task on earth. Upon every one of us rests a tremendous historical responsibility. The fidelity to the cause of the toilers requires from us the highest devotion to our international party. The party, of course, can also be mistaken. By common effort, we will correct its mistakes. In its ranks can penetrate unworthy elements. By common effort, we will eliminate them. New thousands who will enter our ranks tomorrow will probably be deprived of the necessary education. By common effort, we will elevate the revolutionary level. But we will never forget that our party is now the greatest lever of history. Separated from this lever, every one of us is nothing. With this lever in hand, we are all.
For the most part, the majority of people can be reached because these issues impact more and more layers of the working class every day. So it's been really encouraging to get these reactions. When I started, I thought that there would be way more negative interactions than positive, but that's been completely the opposite in my experience.
This is the only party that is actively seeking to overthrow capitalism, not in another life, but in our lifetime.
We understand that the working class needs more than just the objective failure of capitalism to actually overthrow it. It's going to take the subjective factor, the revolutionary party. We have to actually be the collective long-term memory of the lessons of the working class, the lessons of past revolutions. We have to link up the causes of the international working class to the struggles that we have around us. We have to point the way towards revolution, and that cannot be accomplished on our own. It has to be collectively, but not just in a collection of atomized individuals across the country. We have to organize the communists directly around us, and that is through the cell. But how do we actually recruit them? How do we build the cell? How do we put it together? Well, the first thing that you have to remember is that the objective condition of the decline of capitalism is creating a mood in society that is becoming revolutionary. This is the molecular process of revolution that Trotsky talked about. Polling showed that 20% of young people saw communism as their ideal economic system. You may have heard us say that before, but it is pretty remarkable that if we extrapolate that statistic, there's potentially tens of millions of people in America that have a favorable view of communism. To add to that with a more recent statistic, 70% of people that were polled said that the U.S. economic and political system needed major changes or needed to be completely torn down. Again, I'll repeat that. 70% of people are coming to the conclusion that the system in America does not work and it needs to be majorly changed or torn down. So what will happen to these people when the system refuses to change? And we know it will refuse to change. We can see that in the example of the U.S. imperialism in Palestine, seeing the genocide taking place and refusing to change their position on it in any meaningful way.
The United States stands with Israel. We will not ever fail to have their back.
So what will happen to that 70% of people that say that the system needs major changes when they come to the conclusion that changes are no longer possible? Well, the feeling that it needs to be completely torn down will become the dominant feeling in society. But there's already people that are communists that are around us. So we can find these people. Those people are our friends, they're our family, they are our co-workers, acquaintances, classmates. You're going to actually hear in this episode from some of the recent recruits to our party. And the first person you're going to hear from is Kurt from New Jersey. And you've actually heard from Kurt before if you listen to this podcast because of his joint submission that he sent in.
I believe the only path forward for humanity is a proletarian revolution. Capitalism is actively and indiscriminately destroying the planet. I have 2 small children, and thinking about the world that they will inherit makes me weep. I want to be part of the solution to the sickness that grips the world, as I recognize no one can save us except for ourselves.
Growing up in a working family, Kurt had seen his fair share of economic hardships, but also began to see a general problem with the system that we live in.
I've seen how both sides live, and it's always bothered me that, like, I can see people that are clearly working very hard and still have to live in absolute squalor. And there's really nothing that they can do about it either, because they're constantly playing catch up, right? They're either in debt or, as soon as they get ahead, something comes up and now they have an expense that they have to repair their car, or, someone has to go to the doctor. Any little thing that is not, part of your daily bread, basically, anything extra after that seems to just completely knock people down.
Kurt, like a lot of people, went searching for an organization that actually had the same conclusions that he did, that this system was fundamentally broken, but had a very hard time finding an organization that was seriously trying to organize against capitalism.
Tried joining the CPUSA, found out that they were absolutely fucking useless. They also took over a month to email me just to get back on my request for membership. I looked into the PSL. Didn't seem like much was going on there. There was LP that I met at a March 2nd protest in Washington Square Park for Palestine. And I've been doing study groups with them, but that's all they really do is, we do Zoom study groups twice a month, and that's about it. I've been to 2 of them. That's it. There's not really a lot else going on with it.
We meet people like Kurt all the time in our recruitment efforts. This just goes to show that it's not a lack of communists that is the problem. It's actually a vacuum for a party that could actually absorb all of the communist elements. Not just any party, but a serious professional party that is taking the task of overthrowing capitalism as serious as it needs to be taken. We can't take a frivolous attitude and let these communists slip through our fingers. We have to actually create a professional apparatus that can capture and merge with these communists that already exist.
I've learned enough, I've seen enough, it's time to do something. And that was the motivating factor for me. And the experience was good. The first phone call I got from Comrade John, it was a very good conversation. He asked some questions, and he also answered my questions with ease, which made me that much more motivated to be involved. It definitely told me that the organization was serious, and this was exactly where I needed to be.
That's coming from a comrade in Washington, D.C. named Juan. We haven't really had anything in Washington, D.C., but we do now because of efforts of people like Juan for, number one, reaching out. It's also because of the efforts of another comrade that's from Philadelphia named Nico, who on a spring break holiday actually took it upon himself to, instead of just taking a vacation, actually going out to Washington, D.C. and help build the cell.
Yeah, so I used my spring break, my week off work, to head down to Washington, D.C. and to Baltimore to build a cell of the Revolutionary Communists of America. I brought with me 25 copies of our paper, 5 copies of our IDOM theoretical magazine, a couple hundred leaflets and stickers, and over the course of a week, went to a large protest, went to 3 college campuses, talking to students and workers there, and a couple neighborhoods around DC. Over that time, we made 5 new recruits, 5 new dues-paying party-building members, and handed out hundreds of leaflets, sold almost all of the papers and magazines, and really started building in a city that we never had before.
Throughout this campaign that we've been on of just asking people, are you a communist, is that some people are not ready to label themselves as a communist for one reason or another, but we still end up recruiting them because they can be convinced that the thoughts that they had, the beliefs that they do have, do align with what a communist thinks should happen in the world, the changes that they want to see, and the method by which that they think that that change will come about. They come to realize, well, it turns out I am a communist, or I actually agree with what the communists are saying, so I must be one. We've had plenty of examples of that.
About 10 months ago, I was first introduced to the party by stickers that were posted around my college campus. They said, "Are you a communist, Amel?" And honestly, at first I thought it was a joke. We're taught that there's nothing else that will work but the capitalist system, and that other systems such as socialism and communism are bad. However, at this point, like many others, I was sick and tired of this so-called best system and was willing to hear just about anyone else out. So when I saw the communists in person in front of me, I approached them with an open mind. I liked what they said. It only took a couple of weeks after that for me to get involved. Now I've been home for the break between semesters, and my main focus has been on building the party in other areas of Texas. I've been primarily targeting my workplace, and have been trying to raise the political level of consciousness within my coworkers. I've recently had some good conversations with people about the upcoming election, state of the country, and what our perspectives and solutions are on how to approach everything.
And you may be listening to this and think, well, this is great, that there are all these communists around me that I may be able to find, but I don't feel ready. I don't think that I can explain the ideas enough or to the degree of which I think it's necessary to start. And we just want to say that you don't have to wait until you're, quote unquote, ready. What would that even mean, to be ready? Our comrade from Washington, D.C. actually had something really great to say about this.
You've already done the hard part. You've already reached certain conclusions. We can get you the theory, but you already understand, at least from a big picture perspective, that capitalism is the problem.
We have plenty of resources for people to start today. One of those resources is the paper. There's a reason why we print the paper. It's not because we're trying to become newspaper salesmen. It's because a physical paper is, like Lenin said, not just a collective propagandist, a propaganda tool, but also a collective organizer. When people see the paper, they understand it took a professional organization to produce this. The paper can be used to show we really are serious about what we're doing. And here it is, right here. This is our work for the last month or in the month before us. Again, what is to be done? Probably the most well-known but also most misunderstood document from Lenin. It explains all of this, the need for not just a very strong centralized organization, but also a central organ for that organization.
I'm Ben. I'm a member of the Revolutionary Communists of America, and I work at Keynes.
Hello, my name is Anthony. I'm a communist organized at the RCA, and I also work at Raising Cane's.
Tell the audience what is special about you two.
What is it, that we're twins?
No, we're building a cell.
Oh.
You sure idiot. The start of building the cell, it really started in the tail end of winter, tail end of December, where I almost jokingly asked one of my coworkers, hey, are you a communist? Because at that point I was semi-new, 3 months in, a new recruit in my perspective. And they actually answered yes. They answered proudly yes. In fact, they screamed in the kitchen, hell yeah, I'm a communist. I'm a red-blooded commie. And I was like, all right, I can definitely work with this. And luckily we were both pushed out the door to go run trash to the dumpster outside of the restaurant. And I just started explaining what our party is, what cell meetings look like how we develop our theoretical level, what's necessary for a revolution, all the I guess basic principles of what you want someone to understand about the party, and they were actually brought on board. And I had 2 papers in my backpack, two of the socialist revolution issues, and they bought both that day. And I was like, all right, this is a person I can consistently talk to, and they're still in our periphery now. So a few months down the line, me and my brother are consistently selling papers at this workplace, and the middle of spring we realized hey, these 5 people all have the same issue of the communists. Why don't we just make a reading group? And so one of my shifts, I just started asking around where most of those people worked the same day. I was like, hey, do you want to read about this? Do you guys want to talk about this? And I initially asked for just confirmation, and then me and my brother went around the store a second time asking for a day and a time that would work. And eventually that was a Sunday. And that meeting, that was a week after. It was very phenomenal. I myself am surprised how well it went. We sort of popcorn read the second issue. We just discussed it article by article. I think the most remarkable one was an article written by one of our denting comrades, how a coworker was worked to death. And it was weird because it was the Walmart that's not even a mile away from our restaurant. And so everyone realized how close the class struggle was. And I think that is the point of the paper. That is the point of why we have these articles. That's why we have these reports. It's to show people this is nothing alien to us. This is what we're fighting for all the time. This is what we interact with all the time. The meeting was phenomenal, and I think it only went well because of the content of the paper.
I just wanted to add sort of like an elaboration on like how it actually happened, like when it shifted basically. Prior to that, it wasn't just randomly that a bunch of people had the paper. It was like because every single day we were bringing the paper into the workplace, setting it out, and it would get moved, and we have to set it out again. But it sort of inflated to a point when like not a day went by for a while there that like a paper wasn't sold. Like it was like daily paper sales for a while, and that evolved into this where we had maybe 5 or 6 people all with the same issue, all with the same availability, and they all wanted to meet and discuss it. The cell as it stands now, it's a pretty casual thing. Like there isn't like a mandatory attendance or anything like that. And if people want to show up that aren't already in the reading group, it's sort of just open invitation to all of our coworkers. Like we've had random people just drop in. But going forward, I mean, it's just consistently reading the new issues and putting in like various other articles. Like because we've already gone over the second issue and not everyone has the third issue, we're just supplementing that with the pamphlet over the history of the Black struggle and the Socialist Revolution, and everyone's really excited for that.
The most recent paper has our program and our manifesto in it. That is an extremely valuable tool to strike up a conversation with somebody. The program and the manifesto give you a good general outlook for a range of issues that you can actually speak to whatever subject or problem somebody has. You can speak on that. What is our analysis of that? Why does this thing happen? And what should be done about it? And how will a communist party actually achieve that? So the program and the manifesto are extremely valuable resources for this, and we just actually published a convenient booklet with all of these things in it, including the manifesto for the Revolutionary Communist International. Marxist theory is the foundation of our organization. It's what makes up our program and our perspectives, and that takes the form of physical material like the paper, but not just the paper, but our booklets and our books. Examples of these materials being used to recruit are embodied in 2 stories from one comrade in Chicago named Helena.
I picked up, I think it was the Identity Politics pamphlet first, and I can't remember what I read after that. It was just like the intro packet, basically. I started reading it. I met up with some comrades in the branch. I attended a branch, and then I bought the History of Philosophy, which is really what sold me on the IMT as it formerly was. And I was like, wow, I have never encountered a group with this perspective before. People who are actually mobilizing and organizing on a level that could have like a material change. So I was really encouraged by that, and that's how I decided to join. And ever since then, the growth in Chicago has been, nothing short of remarkable. When I first joined, I think it was like maybe 9 or 10 people, just this one branch, and now we're about to divide into 7 branches. We have about 40 members in Chicago now, and I only see that number going up. We still have like tons of contacts coming in. So it's been a crazy like year and a half, but I have learned more and become like more optimistic. I cannot tell you what this has done for my mental health. Just having something worthwhile to put energy into, with an outcome that I can see happening on a scientific basis.
The other story from Helena can actually be found in a previous episode of ours. Helena is the comrade that actually was reading In Defense of Lenin on the train and engaged in a conversation with somebody who was interested in the book just based off of the cover. And Helena was able to talk to this person about the ideas of Lenin and talk about the organization. These moments don't happen with Helena or the person on the train unless you have the physical media of the paper, the booklets, and the book.
The lie that capitalism tells you about alienation and the way that people are unapproachable. And it's like, people are not unapproachable. Like, you don't have to be scared of other people. Other people are living, if they're on the train, more likely than not, they are having like some element of the same experience that you are. And And if that connecting point is like, oh, the train is late again, like, that's crazy, you gotta get to work on time, you know, or whatever it is, there's a way to connect to people. And so, yeah, I think over time I'm becoming more emboldened to be more frontward facing with the communism, shall we say, because everyone has been so supportive. Like, obviously, you might have an interaction with someone who's, you know, the more backwards in their ideology, but I will say, for the most part, the majority of people can be reached, because these issues impact more and more layers of the working class every day. So, yeah, it's been really encouraging to like get these reactions. When I started, I thought that there would be way more negative interactions than positive, but that's been completely the opposite in my experience.
We have to be bold in order to find other communists. It won't simply come down to wearing the hammer and sickle or talking about communism without saying the word communism. It's going to come down to having the material out and open and a willingness and an ability to talk about those ideas. Without that experience and without being prepared, we're not going to be able to recruit the best elements that exist out there in an atomized way as individuals. The only way to prepare yourself and equip yourself with experience and ability is by joining a party, becoming collectively educated through the cell, and then going out into the world as an organized communist. There are certain people that would have never joined had we not made a lot of preparations in the past to become firm in Marxist theory and have a boldness in presenting our ideas. When somebody comes to us and says, I think that I'm interested to join, one person that comes to mind is somebody that's in my area, DFW. His name is Ian.
Both my generation and my mom's generation, millennials, have lived through constant crisis. Capitalism continuing to implode on itself, then be bailed out by the government, then implode on itself, and then that cycle continuing. I think a really big radicalization point and a real reflection point for me was 2020, along with a lot of people. The fact that we had a complete buckling of the supply chains that were so overly complicated to cut down on the cost of production just blew my mind how this country lacked the ability to address a crisis that could have easily been avoided or at least minimized drastically. We had over 1 million people die in this country due to capitalism failing. And again, who are the people to bail out these corporations? The government. Why is that? Because the government doesn't represent the people. A majority of us in this country are living paycheck to paycheck. A majority of us in this country are just a couple paychecks away from being homeless on the streets.
For a while before actually joining the RCA, I understood the importance of getting organized in some way. I kind of got to the point of the world, at least I felt the world was completely collapsing around me. And all I did was complain about it. It got to the point where I needed to either find an organization or start getting organized. And starting off, the only thing that I was able to find was the DSA. The problem with the DSA is there are a lot of differing opinions and different sets of ideals that are so broad that basically nothing gets done. I was in the DSA close to a year, and every time that we would have meetings, it kind of just dissolved into a back and forth with no implementation. And I got sick of the fact that a lot of members, with, again, I don't think any fault of their own, were either supporters of capitalism, actively defending it, claiming that this isn't the fault of capitalism, but a specific version of it. And it got to the point where I felt like I was in the same situation that I was before I started getting organized. And this organization had no basis. It had no way of moving the class movement forward. From there, I ended up becoming a CP USA member, and kind of the same thing. there wasn't any general organization. They had webinars, which I just kind of found insulting, and I got to the point where I was just sick of organizing. I thought that maybe organization is the problem.
Understanding that capitalism is the problem is really only the first step. The other half of that is actually becoming a revolutionary communist. What does that actually entail? What does that demand that you do? And that really starts when you join the organization. Are you joining an organization that automatically puts you into the work as a revolutionary communist? Or are you going to be limited to organizational things that the party is enveloped in, like electoral politics? Or do you leave the members in webinars? Our approach is a lot different. We operate in the real world. That's why we have the Real World newspaper. But many people like Ian are burned out by the way that the left has been for so many years. You can't really even speak of a left existing because it all kind of just exists online or within these circles. What we need to do is create these cells that actually go out and seek roots into the working class. That's what Ian joined whenever he joined our party. He joined, went to a branch meeting, and went directly into working on the picket line, talking to workers, going to protests, intervening, talking about our politics, the need to have a revolutionary solution to Palestine and their liberation. These were the kinds of things that he was automatically put into as soon as he joined, instead of just discussing things or being put on an email list or in a webinar. Ultimately, both these organizations that Ian joined made him feel hopeless whenever he encountered a really distressing situation at work where returns were coming into the store and Ian was basically tasked the sole responsibility for solving that problem because the store was basically losing money. After helping to solve this problem of the returns in the stores, the way that Ian was rewarded was to be blamed by his boss for the whole problem in the first place.
He pointed me out directly, lied about me to everybody in the shop, said that that this had come out of his pocket, and verbatim said that this is a problem because he doesn't have money to buy a Mercedes for his wife. This was my radicalization point. This was a Friday, and I remember going home that day, opening my computer, being so frustrated, so mad that not only had this happened, but I felt like nobody was doing anything to solve the crisis of capitalism. And I actually saw the launch of the Revolutionary Communists of America. They had posted a YouTube video on their channel, and I watched it, and this was around maybe like 9, 10 o'clock, and after watching that video, I thought to myself, this is it. I don't know how to explain it, but this is what I am looking for. Yes, at the time I considered myself a socialist, but I had a feeling that this organization, this party, was different, and I was thoroughly correct. I remember that night writing a pretty long paragraph, and then one of our comrades, Patrick, calling me. That conversation was insane. I remember it being, I think, 40 minutes to an hour. The first thing that he said to me is, I usually don't call comrades after 10, but what you wrote, I just had to speak to you. And our conversation was so good. The explanation of the importance of Vanguard Party, of the policies of Lenin and Trotsky, the importance of internationalism, all of it I was in agreement of and I was in support of. Maybe not knowing as much as I would have liked to, but that did not stop me into getting involved. And from there, I can say without a shadow of a doubt that the Revolutionary Communists of America, the Revolutionary Communists International, are different from any other organization, any other party, because they are the only party that is actively putting a basis. They have a Marxist understanding and are applying that directly using dialectical materialism. That was the failure of a lot of these other organizations. They lacked that basis, and so they had no program. They had no implementation. It's important to go out and organize with the working class, but if there aren't any direct movements to advance the class struggle, to advance the class war, and we're focusing on class collaborationism, nothing will get done. We are still in the exact same situation. And the only party that has shown, with the strikes that I've gone to, talking to workers, our aggregates, our meetings, this is the only party, the only revolutionary vanguard party that is actively seeking to overthrow capitalism. Not in another life, but in our lifetime.
People like Kurt, Helena, Juan, Nico, Ben, Anthony, and Ian, these people were all experiencing the same thing. They understood that capitalism was a problem and it needed to be overthrown, but they didn't know how to do that because they weren't aware that a party existed. And that's really the problem that we have to solve. That's the reason why from the minute that you become a member, you have to take ownership of the organization. You have to jump into recruiting people and letting them know this is a serious organization. We are active members. We're not just checking in or following an email list. We're meeting every single week to discuss what can we do as the communists for the rest of this week. What do we need to learn to prepare ourselves to be ready for when things pop off, like the Palestine Solidarity Movement or another George Floyd movement? That's what we're doing in this organization. It's not for fun or to come together with people that agree with us, but actually struggling to becoming a very sharp and capable political force. That's the approach that you need to take when you're fighting other communists. You don't have to be perfect in your knowledge. You just have to understand the necessity and the urgency at which we need to build this organization. And of course, we don't want to neglect the point that you should be learning. You should try to develop a political level to be more prepared to recruit people or win people over to the ideas.
Sometimes the realizations are not nice. Sometimes they're not pretty. But in order for us to truly address the problem at its root cause, which again is capitalism, the only way that we understand not only that, but we are united as a class, and that only through a united working class, a united proletariat, can we move forward past capitalism into socialism and eventually communism. We can have a better world for everyone. This was like the really big eye-opener, because I always knew that there was the division, the hate. I knew that there was a problem. I knew that we were united, but I never understood what united us. And now I do.
We can't just be comfortable not knowing how to answer questions. We can't just be comfortable saying, well, I got the basics down and I can usually connect with people with these ideas. You have to develop a deeper understanding. And actually, you may be a communist, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're a Marxist yet. That's going to take education. It's going to take understanding the theory and taking that seriously. That's also the importance of a cell. Learning is not something that can really happen as effectively on an individual basis. The learning that has to take place in an organization is a collective learning process. It's social learning that's really going to qualitatively change the numbers that we have in the party. What we're trying to do is actually apply the things that we're learning. So you're not going to be able to do that by yourself. You're going to have to do that with this group of people. Those discussions that you have in the branch are going to be one place in which that collective learning takes place, but it's also going to be reading groups, it's going to be public events, and it's also going to be the contact conversations that you have with people, the conversations that you have at the newspaper sale. When somebody asks you a question that you don't know the answer to, that is the objective situation telling you you're going to have to raise your political level so that you can answer that question. That's the whole reason that we We say start now so that you can understand what we need to learn and what to prioritize. That being said, we do have a fundamental reading list for education that tries to address as much as it can the basic questions that we're usually asked, or the basic aspects of our perspectives. The link for that plan can be found in the description of this podcast. Once somebody agrees with the perspective and wants to join, they should join. Once somebody says they're a communist, they should be encouraged to join. They should be put into the work immediately. That's the other aspect of this that is really important. The people that join have to be integrated into the work of building the communist cell. We have to understand, again, learning doesn't happen just with conversations. It has to happen with the activity. Learning is a social process, but it's also a process that has to take place with the rest of our body, not just our brains. It has to happen in real life. Every single new person should immediately take ownership of the organization and building the cell into their own hands. That means tasking them with postering, tasking them with paper sales, going to a protest contingent, leading a discussion in the branch, going out and finding the communists around them, going out to their classrooms and speaking up in class, raising their hand, putting forward the communist perspective. It is up to us to put these tasks in front of these comrades so that they can actually learn. But also, we have a whole list of tasks that are needed in the cells. We're not just giving people busy work to figure out things for themselves and to solely develop themselves. We're also having to actually solve the material needs of the organization. And so there will be a list of tasks that are need to be done. You may think, well, a new person may not be suited to this task. They have no experience, but that's precisely the best way to give them that experience. Lenin said this in 1905 in a letter to Bogdanov and Gusev. He says, "We need young forces. I am for shooting on the spot anyone who presumes to say there are no people to be had. The people in Russia are legion. All we have to do is recruit young people more widely and boldly, more boldly and widely, and again, more widely and again more boldly, without fearing them." Lenin says, this is a time of war. The youth, the students, and still more so the young workers will decide the issue of the whole struggle. Get rid of all the old habits of immobility, of respect for rank, and so on. Form hundreds of circles from among the youth and encourage them to work in full blast. Enlarge the committee threefold by accepting young people into it. Set up half a dozen or a dozen subcommittees. Co-opt any and every honest, energetic person. Allow every subcommittee to write and publish leaflets without any red tape. There's no harm if they do make a mistake. We will gently correct them. We must, with desperate speed, unite all people with revolutionary initiative and set them to work. Do not fear their lack of training. Do not tremble at their inexperience and lack of development. In the first place, if you fail to organize them and spur them on to action, they will follow the Mensheviks and Gabons. And this very inexperience of theirs will cause 5 times more harm. In the second place, events themselves will teach them in our spirit. Events are already teaching everyone precisely in our spirit. He goes on to say, only you must be sure to organize hundreds of circles, completely pushing into the background the customary, well-meant, committee hierarchic stupidities. This is a time of war. Either you create new, young, fresh, energetic battle organizations everywhere for revolutionary work of all varieties among all strata, or you will go under wearing the aureole of committee bureaucrats. Those are strong words from Lenin. He reiterates certain words to really make the point. It's not something that he does often in his writing, is repeat a word over and over again, but he does it here to illustrate the turning point at which they were at in 1905. Obviously, we don't have the same conditions, but we find ourselves in a scenario that requires the same exact attitude. So don't be afraid to get into the work immediately, and don't be afraid to recruit people with no experience and put them to work immediately. Only the taking ownership of the organization and responsibility of the work into their own hands will actually create communists. We're not creating a school of communism with a degree and a resume. That is not the kind of organization we're building. And so the method of trying to train people up and make sure that they have a certain skill level before they operate in the work is not called for. It's uncalled for. It's completely inappropriate for the wartime that we are in right now. The class war is calling on us to put people into the struggle and learn through experience. Trotsky says this later in a discussion with Fred Zeller from the SWP. He says, leave the maximum amount of initiative to the comrade responsible for the work. In case of mistakes, correct them by explaining amicably how they are prejudicial to the interests of the party. Only impose sanctions in the most serious of cases. The general rule must be to permit each to progress, to develop, and improve. He adds on in the point that you can't just organizationally make people do things. We have to also politically educate the comrades into why they're doing what they're doing. We're not trying to build an organization of obedient people. Lenin said if you did that, you'd have an organization of obedient fools, and you don't want that. You want people that can politically think for themselves. So when Lenin talks about gently correcting them, it's in the same vein as what Trotsky is saying here. We have to politically explain the necessity of the way we do our work. For more on how to create Marxists and how Marxists are formed, you should see our previous episode, How Marxists Are Formed, which talks precisely about how to educate ourselves and how to educate the comrades around us. But there's also a wealth of educational material that we have published that, again, will be below in the description. An unorganized communist is a contradiction in terms. That means that if we know there is potentially tens of millions of people out there that agree with our perspective, then we have a big task in front of us, and it's not going to be easy, but we have to get started today. We were hoping with this podcast we could give some advice based off of our experience building these cells so far. But the best way to learn is, as was explained earlier, by experience. So you have to get out there and try to recruit, and you're not going to be alone if you are a part of the party. We try our best to give people every resource they could possibly need to be set up for success. If you have a story about cell building that you'd like to share, a story about recruitment, or a question about recruitment or cell building, definitely go to the link in the description to submit that to us. This is the way that we put together the paper, and of course these podcasts. These contributions by all the comments that you heard were sent in. A lot of this is general advice to just get you started, but for more detailed advice, there's also some articles that will be in the description. But the most important thing is to build with a sense of urgency, because nobody will build this party but us. So go out there, find the other communists, get educated, organize, and prepare for the war that we have in front of us. It is not uncommon to encounter skepticism or even extreme pessimism about the possibility of a socialist revolution in the United States of America. We hear things like, I agree that we need a socialist revolution, but that's never going to happen in America. Or, isn't the American working class too privileged to revolt? Given decades of ideological onslaught against communism and socialism in schools and in the media, and the effects of the post-World War II economic boom, which temporarily blunted class consciousness for an entire historical period, it is easy to assume that the U.S. will remain capitalist forever.
But the tide is now turning, and it must be emphasized that even the most powerful imperialist power on Earth is not immune to the laws of the class struggle. Throughout history, revolutions have exploded in what seemed to be the most unlikely places. In 2011, the Arab Spring started in Tunisia, which only a few months earlier had been deemed a model country by US imperialism. In 1978, the CIA considered Iran as the most stable country in the Middle East, not long before the Shah was overthrown in the 1979 Iranian Revolution. And let us not forget that prior to the 1917 Russian Revolution, the first time the working class took power and began the socialist transformation of society, the Tsarist Empire was viewed by almost everyone as an utterly conservative and reactionary society. But it isn't just the poorer ex-colonial or semi-colonial countries that are prone to revolution. The German revolutions in 1918 and 1923 and the British General Strike in 1926 show us that even in the economic powerhouses of capitalism, the contradictions of capitalism cannot be fundamentally overcome. In fact, in 1968, the largest revolutionary general strike in history shook France. This was a country that had been lauded for its high living standards, and it occurred during a period of economic upswing. All of this goes to show that it is not the absolute level of want or poverty that makes a revolution, but rather the constant instability of the system, which eventually pushes the masses of workers to realize that they need to take matters into their own hands. For Marxists, this is the essence of a revolutionary situation. Revolutions are an objective phenomenon under class society. They develop according to their own laws and occur independently of the will of any individual or even of society as a whole. Just as we can confidently say that earthquakes will erupt due to the constant motion of the tectonic plates, history proves that revolutions are an inevitable result of a society divided into opposing classes. While we can't predict the exact time and location of earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, or revolutions, we can be sure that they are coming. Still, some argue that the US, with its advanced military and home to the richest people on Earth, is a unique beast. Surely this must be a special case, but this is ultimately just an inverse reflection of American exceptionalism. The idea that the US is somehow unique and fundamentally different from all other countries or civilizations. While it is easy for radical youth to reject the notion that the US is the best, it is ultimately the same kind of logic to argue that the US working class is uniquely inert and reactionary, or that communism is uniquely alien to American shores. In fact, communism and class struggle have a long and heroic history in the US, and the American working class has militant and revolutionary traditions. From the 1776 Revolution to the Revolutionary War to overthrow slavery in the 1860s, to the rise of the industrial working class and the building of the American labor movement, class struggle has deep roots in this country. And if all that were not enough, we should bear in mind that consciousness changes over time and is deeply impacted by events. According to a 2023 poll, 11% of the population, over 28 million adults, believe that communism is the ideal economic system. This means that a large swath of Americans are already communists. The broad trajectory of US society in the recent period gives us a sense of where things are headed. The 2008 economic crisis, the 2011 Occupy movement, BLM, the rise and fall of Bernie Sanders and the DSA, the recent uptick in labor actions and unionization campaigns, the pandemic and the 2020 economic crisis, and above all, the monumental 2020 George Floyd uprising show us that economic and political instability, and above all, the class struggle, are on the rise. Even greater events are in our future. The question is not, will revolution happen, but rather, when, and will we be prepared? This is what motivates the American communists to carry out our most pressing task, to build a revolutionary party capable of uniting the working class in a struggle to carry through the American socialist revolution. Once US capitalism is overthrown, the final victory of the world socialist revolution will be squarely on the agenda. If you are a communist, then get organized with Socialist Revolution, the American section of the International Marxist Tendency.
I became a communist basically through the title being given to me due to the way I felt about systems that I grew up in. I grew up in East Harlem watching my neighborhood slowly get gentrified and commercialized for all these major corporations instead of the small businesses that used to be there. For the longest time as a kid, my question was always just why? Why is this happening? And when I found out why it was happening is, why do we keep doing this? Why does this system seem to be the only system that we allow to try to work? Like in school, they would literally tell us as black kids in the community Like, they would literally tell us that everything is against us. They would tell us that the system isn't for us. They would explain our past, but they wouldn't give us hope. They would just tell us that that's it. That's all we had. So I always tried to think about pro-worker, pro-people ideas. And whenever I would bring them up to teachers or friends or older adults, they would always call me a communist or say that's communism. As a kid, I didn't understand it. But now that I do, I don't see a problem in being called that if it means that my ideals will make people's lives better.
Growing up in Mexico, you always ask the question of why is there so much poverty around? Why do mothers and their children have to come up to your car, like just begging for spare change? I never got a good answer to that. They would say like, oh, they just didn't work hard enough, or just like the system was just not working for them. Why wasn't it working? And then coming here and just seeing the immense amount of wealth that there was in New York, all of these skyscrapers, all of this infrastructure, such a high level of development, and yet there's still people begging in the streets, right? There's still mothers and children, like, begging in the streets.
And something in my head clicked at that point, and this is like right at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement too, right? And I was already getting into Marxism because of Bernie's betrayal, and that day where we found out that rents were due, but you're not allowed to work, I started reading State and Revolution, and the fact that Lenin was able to accurately describe the state today was just like this almost prophetic like skill. I was like, there's something to this, and that was it. I never looked back and just kind of dived right into Marxism after that. Found the IMT a year later.
I think that came along with me joining the workforce and seeing not only are we not organized as a working class, but the bourgeois is heavily organized, and that is part of the reason why working class people are not organized.
It's terrifying. It's like staring into a never-ending hole. When you look into it, it just feels like there's nothing on the other end. There's nothing waiting for me there, other than losing the planet that I live on, that I love dearly, that I want to explore and protect the beauty of. Just know that you're not alone. It may be a giant, scary world, but if we all band together and decide that we're done with this, we can change it. And I truly do believe that.
It's not about what's best for you, the worker. They don't care about your input. They don't care about your well-being. They only care about lining their pockets.
There's a huge mass of unemployed people in this country, even in the area, that are looking for work, that are looking for jobs. But why can't these people be put to work? Because it's too expensive to pay for that many wages, and it cuts into corporate profits. And so this is a huge problem.
If you own the means of production, it would be totally different, because instead of working for a wage, you have a stake in the product that you're making, and so the more you work, the more you get, basically.
When I joined, it was more of like just kind of like this anxiety to fight back. But as I really became more and more involved, it stopped being like, oh yeah, I'm a communist, I'm fighting for the right thing, to no, I'm a communist and I'm going to overthrow capitalism. This is what I'm going to do.
It's all these people who are sacrificing things. There's got to be something to this communism that I should look into.
Something I definitely try to paint to some of my coworkers, and some of them are responding very, very positively to these remarks. Only going to get worse, and this is going to make people wake up. Events change consciousness. People are going to start, looking for revolutionary conclusions. And if you're a student, if you're at work, you need to be that person that people can come to when they want to get organized. You need to organize your student body, you need to organize your workers, and it starts with studying theory, and it starts with finding organizations like the IMT. That led me to step out of the online sphere and focus on what's happening right in front of my face. Not just carry the ideology of a communist, but carry the action of a communist.
By social media. Actually, that's the fact. This anger in society is actually the explanation for the rise of polarization, for the rise of Trumpism, this phenomenon we'll discuss more tomorrow, but this collapse of the liberal center ground in politics, as a comrade said today, this growing hatred of the establishment, the suspicion toward all media and other institutions. But Trumpism is also going to have its rise and its fall, because it offers no solution to the working class. It doesn't offer a response to the impasse of capitalism, these underlying historic factors that are driving this decline, this relentless decline in living standards. But there's no solution to that. what Trumpism really represents, it's not just a section of the working class, by the way. It's a middle class phenomenon primarily. But you have a middle class that's vacillating, that's starting to lose confidence in the traditional status quo. That vacillation can go to the right. It can also go in another direction. You know, Lenin talked about the conditions for the rise of a revolutionary situation. The ruling class being unable to control society in the old way, being unable to rule in the old way. They start to have crises. They start to split. They start to have disagreements with different wings about how to proceed, how to move forward. Crisis of institutions, crisis of confidence. We absolutely see that in a total collapse of the legitimacy of the Supreme Court today. You're going to see that with every single institution. It's already underway, shattering illusions that bourgeois democracy has any real meaning for the working class. But the middle class vacillation is a part of a revolutionary situation. You have this polarization, and ultimately it ends up bringing the middle class to a position, the petty bourgeoisie, the people who have some stake in the system, but they're being crushed, they're being ruined, to say, capitalism doesn't really offer me the security that I need. It doesn't offer me a future. If there's another force moving forward, the other condition is you need the working class to be ready to move, to have that discontent fueling, not just building up and accumulating, but igniting and being in a place where millions of working people are ready to take matters into their own hands. As we've seen since 2019, in country after country, that point has been reached, you know, over and over again. Of course, the final condition that this famous Lenin's 4 conditions for a revolutionary situation is that you have to have a revolutionary leadership present that can connect with that in that moment where the upsurge is actually ignited. That can connect with it, put forward a program for revolution, for what it actually means to transfer power from the capitalist to the working class. So we see that, you know, conditions determine consciousness. This is a basic idea of Marxism, but consciousness isn't determined in a mechanical, direct way. It happens dialectically. You have this long, gradual accumulation of experience, this accumulation of disappointments with what life under capitalism represents, coupled with dramatic shocks, coupled with those moments that they call them once-in-a-lifetime crises, but they keep happening over and over, and it keeps impacting consciousness, and it changes the way that people think about the system. Going back to this idea of the old left and what happened in the 30s, the radical, you know, this idea, you know, we have meetings of the Communist Party filling Madison Square Garden with 21,000, you know, communists with symbols like this, and now people at Jacobin treat it like we're on this on the fringes of society, and you know, we can't let go of these dreams. Well, what was it about conditions? What was it about the historic environment that led millions of people to draw revolutionary conclusions? Not just that, but to get involved. What was it that pushed all of those young people to become cadres of mass Marxist organizations, of socialist parties, communist parties, to the point where they were a major factor in U.S. politics? It wasn't, you know, maybe the mass revolutionary party that could have taken power at the moment, but they were a major factor. What was it that pushed them? It's precisely experiences like the Great Depression, like world wars. These kinds of, and I mean, we don't have to search very far for the kinds of experiences that are radicalizing the young generation, the 2008 crisis, and what it meant to grow up in the aftermath of that. And now you have the 2020, and you have, you know, this period that we've entered. We can only imagine what events are going to be added to this list. And I think the point is, we actually live in a period where we're going to have even greater crises on the horizon than anything like the Great Depression, even greater than the world wars. I mean, if you look at the rising tensions between US and China, and what this conflict between the 2 greatest imperialist powers on the face of the planet represents, that's 40% of the world economy represented by 2 countries. And they're, in a typical imperialist fashion, muscling their way to domination of the greater and greater parts of the world. Now, there's no question, U.S. imperialism dominates the world economy still, but it doesn't dominate it like it used to 20 years ago. It's going through a relative decline in its domination. Problem is, while the U.S. share of world GDP has fallen from 50% to 22%, China's share has increased from 1% to 15%. So you have, it's no longer a situation where you have one imperialist power and a certain stability comes from the fact that that's the one world policeman. It's no longer so stable. It's a new alignment of what's happening in the balance of forces in the world power. China is the world's #1 lender with more outstanding loans than the IMF, the World Banks, all OECD creditor governments combined. It has the world's largest navy. It has double the number of active troops. as the United States. Now, you know, so far U.S. imperialism has refused to even call a no-fly zone in Ukraine. They don't want to send boots on the ground. They're not in a position, you know, I mean, this relative decline in the strength of U.S. imperialism is a historical fact. And even so, you have, you know, if something were to erupt over Taiwan in the coming years, you may still have a situation where both countries are willing to avoid an open, direct warfare because of the nuclear threat, which neither ruling class has an interest in. They want to dominate the world economy. They don't want to be completely wiped off the map.
Same time tomorrow.